Hello and welcome to the Guitar Hang Podcast. I'm your host, John Stancorp. Today's hang is with the exceptional Randy Mcstine. From touring the world with Porcupine Tree to his thriving solo career, Randy's guitar mastery transcends boundaries. We dive into his remarkable journey, evolution as a guitar virtuoso, and the passion that fuels his extraordinary career. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button below and ring the bell for notifications. And now, let's hang with Randy Mcstine.
Nice. I have to note your Rush shirt because I just started cracking into Getty's new book a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I've got that. It's on its way to me. I've My F in Life. I can't wait to read it. I've seen a couple of highlights from his book tour.
Yeah.
Where Paul Rudd is the moderator, and it's the part that I saw was him talking about Neil's last days, his last weeks, and that kind of stuff. Kind of
Yeah.
listening to the catalog and kind of listening to his life's work.
Yes.
And how imperative it was to let Getty know just how proud, and Lurks too.
Yeah.
How proud he was of their work together, because it's one of the sweetest tales to me. As sad as it is that Neil's passed,
Sure.
those guys created an amazing body of work, and there was, even though there's tragedy, there was no infighting. There was no major drama between the three of them. They had their band issues, I'm sure, but there was no band changes. It's not personnel things or acrimony. Sure. They kept their sense of humor, which above all,
right,
was I guess a very Canadian thing.
Yeah. Well, this book is a real gift. I'm about 100. I'm going to say about close to 150 pages in, and they haven't even gotten to recording Fly By Night yet.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
So it's really it's quite a powerful book. I won't say anything more about it other than I think from a fellow fan perspective, it's just it's a really great, insightful document to get after all these years. And I think already, I mean, there's been some things that were pretty surprising just about how those guys came up and the hardships and stuff. So we'll have to connect when you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it strikes me that they. Well, I mean, just Getty's story alone, his parents being Holocaust survivors and all that goes with that, and just. Did you grow up in New York?
I did. Yeah, I basically I live pretty close to where I grew up. I've moved a couple of times, but moved back about a year ago.
This isn't a non sequitur because it kind of ties in. I grew up in Cincinnati. It's probably not as brutal winters as what you experienced, but there were vast periods of time where it was cold and gray, and there was something about, to me, going to see Rush, or just the Rush experience, felt like a cold, even though I listened to it all year round, it was a cold weather thing.
Uh-huh.
There was some, I don't know if I'm making any sense at all, but there was something about that.
Sure.
Listening to those albums, my memory that I associate is just being in somebody's car driving around, being cold as hell because they're, a 72 Pinto,
yeah,
to a cassette of Hemispheres.
Sure.
And just that whole experience. So, and I think when you spend a lot of time indoors as a kid, it kind of lends itself to getting deeper into music, getting deeper into playing an instrument. I didn't start playing until much later in life, unlike my peers. But music was always a passion of mine, and it felt like it was the perfect way to beat the fact that I didn't grow up in Southern California where the weather was beautiful. My wife grew up in LA, and her experience growing up as a kid was far different, So I think, as somebody that grew up in New York, you probably can understand what I'm saying, that there's something to that thing of being a little bit withdrawn for many months at a time because you can't get outside and do much.
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, the weather sort of forces different activity by default. You really get 4 seasons in New York. And it's funny because I've since made a lot of friends from California, and they will talk about um, the kind of East Coast resilience that maybe some people on the West Coast
Yeah.
don't naturally have because of those kind of conditions.
Right.
Um, so yeah, of course, the nature of where you grow up definitely affects a lot of that. And then to your point about associating, music with time and place. I mean, I think that's true of just about anybody you would talk to. It's just
Yeah.
your personal connection
Yeah.
to a piece of music or a time in your life, can put you right back there
Yeah.
in place. Yeah. So I mean, like for me with Rush in particular, because of my age, I wasn't able to see them live until they came back around for Vapor Trails,
Okay.
and I was in my early teens then. Um, but their tours always happened to be from that point on a lot of times the sort of summer shed
Yeah.
venues. So I first saw them at a place called Montage Mountain in Pennsylvania, and then I saw them at Darien Lake outside of, I think, Rochester, New York. So I mean, I saw them basically every time they did a North American leg from Vapor Trails to the end.
Yeah.
I always saw them at least once on every tour. But yeah, it was typically summertime where like the first set it was still light outside, and then the second set was dark, and yeah.
Yeah, I was fortunate to the time in my memory in the 70s and early 80s. It seemed like every time they came around was in the dead of winter. And
Yeah.
growing up in Cincinnati, up until the Who tragedy,
Oh yes. Yeah.
going to a concert, I'm 58, but going to a concert was there was a lot of danger involved in terms of serious fights breaking out, altercations between teens and police. In '77, when Zeppelin played at the Coliseum, some guys that were out of their mind on drugs took a police motor cruiser and threw it over an embankment. I mean, it was a rough,
Yeah.
in the movie The Wall, Pink
Hmm.
Floyd Wall, they show kind of like a riot scene at a concert. That
Yes.
was not way off base. It was a rough thing, and so my parents were very reluctant to have me go to shows. But it was that kind of thing, where you're getting to the show and it's cold and dark and you know it was kind of a sinister thing, and it was very exciting. You get into the Coliseum, and as soon as the lights went down and then the stage lighting came on, this was in the era that was pre MTV, so I had no idea the first time I saw those guys what they. I mean, I seen some posters of them, but I'd never really seen them move
Yes.
around or anything, or to hear that in real time. So it seemed like a very special thing, because there was just not as much stuff. Like now you can watch a YouTube video and see
Right.
your favorite musician making breakfast, or
Yeah. Yeah.
out washing their car or whatever. So it's cool in one way, but in the other, when I was younger, it was there wasn't as much.
Well, I certainly because even so I'm 35, but I grew up out of the gate with all of the kind of music that we're talking about and what
Yeah.
we'll probably continue to talk about. So, you could say an old soul in that way. But even I romanticize that era of when things
Yeah.
were more, mysterious because, you know, the pressure, especially for, my generation and people who are, younger than me, to be constantly revealing and constantly putting out quote unquote content.
Yeah.
Um, it's not something that comes natural to me. Some people obviously take to it, and it's like it's a whole industry of influencers and all this kind of stuff. But I think about those stories of other people I know who would say the same thing. It's like, yeah, maybe I had a couple of records, and whatever the pictures were in the record, that's all you knew of that particular artist. And so when you saw them live, it was both still mysterious, but also just incredibly revealing because like you actually it was finally living and breathing in front of you.
Yeah.
Whereas now that's 24/7 on demand, and it's expected of you as and not even a new artist, but just an artist in this day and age who hasn't reached a level where they need to constantly promote,
Yeah.
uh, to always be doing something, for the world to see. And yeah, it's a strange pressure, I think, to have.
Yeah. Uh, When you were so you were exposed to a lot of the music that we're kind of talking about, progressive rock or classic rock stuff at a very early age. I would guess that based on, and thank you for sending those songs, by the way. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we'll get into that for
Yeah.
sure.
But based on the way that you play and sing, and that's you are definitely an old soul because it seems inconceivable that you would have that kind of seasoning in
Hmm.
35. That's
Well, thank you for saying that.
yeah, yeah, it's incredible. I've gotten to see some of the video stuff that you've done with Porcupine Tree, and I've seen some of the stuff on social media doing some of those gigs with Adam, and then so and we both have a mutual friend in Tom Quinn.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so as you can see, the Gilmore Strat back there.
That's
I've been doing the Pink Floyd tribute thing for 15 years myself. So
nice, nice. Yeah, that was a fun time in my life. I played in a band with Tom called PFX,
yeah,
Floyd Experience, from about 2013 to I guess 2016 or 2017, like four or five tours that we did. Yeah.
yeah. What was your feeling of that? What was I know it was Tom's a great guy. I was just
Yeah.
curious what the tribute thing was like for you. What your experience was.
Yeah, that's an interesting place to start. I guess, if I think about it at the time, it was the first like professional touring gig that I had.
Yeah,
2013, I would have been just knocking on 25
yeah,
years old. And I had already had over a decade plus of gigs under my belt. I was a real kind of weekend warrior. Not even that. I mean, just playing gigs all the time. But that was the first big production show that I was involved in, and it was also the first time I had been technically hired to fill a lead vocalist role because, as you know, Tom was the main guitarist and band leader, and so by default, I mean he was the Gilmore of the band. Um, but they typically in the lead singer role would be a second guitarist. So I, growing up, was always a guitarist first, and the vocals came much later. So it was actually quite an honor and a real marker for me, both professionally and just from a confidence point of view, that it was my vocal ability that sort of landed me the gig, and the guitar playing was like a plus in that situation. It's the first time that had ever happened.
yeah,
Um, Artistically speaking, I have to say it confused me and gave me an appreciation for the role of what I think a tribute band is. As somebody who was, primarily trying to make my way through original music, to step out on mostly like theater stages every night to a packed house full of people that wanted to essentially hear glorified cover songs. It felt oddly like, not that I was selling out, but it felt like a little bit of a betrayal to the fact that I had friends in original bands who were brilliant, who would never get to that level. And I thought it was like kind of a crime, really. But then I started to realize that rock music and a lot of things are heading in a classical direction, where what you have in, say, the Pink Floyd catalog is this music that is loved and adored by millions and millions of people around the world, and we don't have a Pink Floyd around anymore to play that music. We have some, remnants of it still, of course, but we don't have the band Pink Floyd, and there will be a time where even the individual members are no more. So I think the sort of duty and service of a really good tribute act is to be able to channel that music with passion,
Right.
and for people to still get to hear that music again, living and breathing in front of them, as opposed to only having the record that they've heard 1,000 times
Yeah.
in isolation. I think people still want to get together in a room with lights and a big PA system and close their eyes, and if you can give them that feeling that they are like hearing Pink Floyd, if it's close enough to channeling the spirit, which I believe on our really good nights we were able to do. I mean, look, I don't sound like Waters or Gilmour as a vocalist, but I grew up loving that music, and I think I was able to at least get the spirit of it correct. Um, and the band played really well together as just a good rock band should. So I think if all the elements come together, then you have you're still doing something worthwhile, you know.
And
So
yeah, especially in a Pink Floyd scenario, more than any other tribute, the thing that you can do to serve the music the best is to remove your personality from it. I've seen some other tributes that will interject so much of themselves, like talking to the audience, or maybe in a very American rock and roll way, kind of ham it up on stage. Now, clearly they're having fun, and that's great, but it's really the antithesis of what you would have seen in a Pink Floyd show. The,
yeah,
the only interaction that you were back in the glory days of Pink Floyd was maybe Roger uh, scowling, or being rude to the audience. You know,
right,
but as far as a tribute band, it seems to me the best way to serve the audience and the body of work is to put on a show where it's less about you,
right,
and you know not being terribly demonstrative on stage is probably a good place to start. You know what I mean? Or
yeah,
not, you know, uh, throwing your guitar around and all that kind of stuff, and just being
sure,
overly demonstrative, and a kind of, it's not like it's Nazareth or humble pie or something like that,
sure,
an
sure,
American rock thing. So,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's cool to hear your take on that. But I will say, as a vocalist, it's rare to hear somebody that plays as brilliantly as you and sings as well as you. You would not be out of line to compare your voice to like an Ian Thornley of Big Wreck.
oh, I love Ian, yeah.
Your voice is right up there with it.
But thank you for saying that. That's a tall compliment for sure.
Yeah, yeah. When I first heard, I was like, "Wow, that holy shit! This is really good stuff."
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
Awesome. And the influences, obviously, besides the progressive rock stuff, is there anything that was an influence that might uh, be a little bit off the radar for people who are fans of your work?
Yeah, well, so the material in question that we're sort of dancing around is this, and I don't know when this is going to air. So, but it'll be out December 1st, and it's this rock album I've put together called Unintentional, and the whole idea behind it is kind of getting back to my other roots, which were always alongside the progressive rock influences. So, my earliest memories of music are both, audio and visual, because I was born in '88. So by the time I was like 3 or 4, I remember seeing things like Eric Johnson and Stevie Ray Vaughan on Austin City Limits.
Yeah.
Um, Gary Moore's Still Got the Blues was out. This kind of stuff. So for context, in my immediate household, my dad wasn't a musician, but he was just a massive music head, and specifically just a big fan of guitar driven rock music. So I had the Yes, King Crimson kind of side of things going, but he was also a bit of a hard rock metalhead, and um, a lot of blues rock. So, I mean, I was constantly hearing guitar music. So I mean, if it was going to be in the sort of blues rock category, Gary Moore would be a huge one from that era. His '80s stuff too, but that was more of a metal thing. But Peter Green and Rory Gallagher and, like I said, Stevie Ray Vaughan, that kind of stuff. And then later on, just kind of that classic late '60s, early '70s kind of power trio rock, Mountain, and more obscure things too, like Trapeze, Glenn Hughes's first band. So I always loved that aesthetic. It was just kind of a part of, it was imprinted on me very early on. And visually speaking, he was the kind of guy that would go to a lot of these kind of CD and record fairs where you could, go from booth to booth, and people would have a lot of bootleg VHS
Yeah.
concerts. And they'd have the little like 5-inch screen so that you could put
Right.
the tape in the VCR and kind of see if it was worth buying or not. But a lot of these vendors had pro shot stuff that would eventually make up what we love about YouTube, and some of the things that have since become official releases by bands. So like I was just constantly watching concert footage as a kid because he'd have his friends over and they would watch that stuff too.
Right.
So I naturally gravitated toward the guitar as an instrument, and there are many pictures of me as a really young kid just kind of turning things sideways and pretending to strum it, whether it's a toy vacuum cleaner or a tennis racket or a rake, this kind of thing. So I was kind of like born and bred in a way to be a guitar player. And when I turned 5 years old, my parents got me a Fender Lead 2 electric guitar, which is like a shorter scale guitar. So that was my first instrument. And I kind of just, messed around with it for almost a year before I started taking lessons. And by right around the time I started taking lessons, I also saw my first concert, which was Yes at the Broome County Arena in Binghamton, New York, which is very close to where I grew up. And that was with Trevor Rabin on
Yeah.
guitar. And they had an album out at that time called Talk,
Talk. Yeah. I remember
which
that.
I think is a very underrated gem, and for obvious reasons, it's very sentimental to me. But I still go back to it from time to time and think like there was a lot of really interesting stuff
Yeah.
happening on that album. But yeah, I mean, for a first show, we had front row center seats. It was amazing, and
Yeah.
I had just turned 6 at that point, and a lot of the classic bands had new music around, and were touring again. So my first concerts, I mean, I got to see Yes twice that year. I saw the Allman Brothers. Then within the next year, I saw ELP with Jethro Tull, King Crimson. Uh, there was a cool triple bill with Dream Theater, Deep Purple with Steve Morse, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer again. So, I was immersed
Yeah.
in it. And so yeah, I got a little off track there, but the point being, guitar driven rock music was always a part of the sort of overall picture. And at different points in my creative life and in my career, I've gotten to, be a part of things that displayed more of one thing than the other. And I've become, perhaps known as this progressive rock guy because of my associations and
Right.
a lot of the music that I've made. But really, I've always considered myself at the core just kind of a blues rock based guitar player who loves a lot of different things and really likes to experiment with different sounds and textures. And I've gone through different phases where I was either more into the prog rock thing than the blues thing. This kind of stuff that makes up this intentional record, or unintentional record rather, has sort of found its way back into my life in the last couple of years, specifically, if anything, because of coming into possession of a beautiful Les Paul, which is a guitar that I've always wanted, but just never had.
Right.
And I finally just like found the one that I couldn't resist, and I like a superpower or something. It made me want to take the role of that archetype of the sort of guitar hero with the gold Les Paul.
Oh yeah.
And when I play it, it's just what my fingers and what my heart wants to do. So this record, um, in a lot of ways, it's called unintentional because I didn't plan on making it. When I finished a tour with Porcupine Tree just this August, I had this local gig on the books that I've played for years, and it's called Blues on the Bridge. It's a free festival. I've been playing it since I was 12 years old,
Yeah.
and I'll skip a few years and then I'll come back, and I always try to do something different. And I did it a couple of years ago, and I put together this little trio to play the kind of stuff we're talking about: Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, ZZ Top, Robin Trower, um, Mountain, on and on. This time, I thought it would be fun to write a set of music that was kind of in the style of that stuff, because I'd never really attempted to do it like on purpose. Those, how influences work. They work their way into your music naturally, but this was like a deliberate attempt to write something like that. And I thought about the aesthetic, and I said, well, it's just gonna be a Les Paul. I'm gonna make it kind of period correct. I'm not gonna have a bunch of effects beyond a few fuzz boxes and maybe just like a touch of delay. And I'm gonna have a bass player and drummer, but I'm gonna be the only singer. So I, sat down just really over the course of a week to just, because I was on a deadline, just write whatever came to mind. If I started riffing around and it sounded cool, stick with the idea, finish it up, song's done. And it was
Yeah.
just kind of like banging them out, because really I thought I would play the gig, it would be fun, and then I would just throw it all away. It was just all a massive, very quick experiment to just make it happen. And kind of I like doing stuff like that every once in a while, to just kind of shake up the
Yeah.
creative process. But as I was doing it, it started to kind of like reveal things to me. There was an ease to it. It was fun. It was natural. I wasn't thinking about it at all. I wasn't thinking about making a record. I designed the demos to be exactly as it would be if we played live. So I wasn't adding the kind of stuff that I always add to my records, layers of vocal harmonies and little ear candy guitar parts. It was just like straight up, this is a trio. This is what it's going to sound like when we play it. And we played the gig, and it was fun. And I was listening to the stuff, and I thought, these recordings are actually like, there's a spirit to this stuff.
Yeah.
That's so in the moment. I realized that I couldn't recreate it exactly like that, but two, I wanted to hear it for real. I wanted to hear it with a good vocal track, or a better one anyways, and a real drummer, because I had programmed the drums, just played them in with the keyboard. So I just took an afternoon to sing through the stuff, and then I told my friend Marco Miniman about the project, because Marco and I have a great working relationship. We have a duo called Mcstine and Miniman, which is very progressive and just kind of all over the map. But he's so efficient, and he's such a brilliant player. And I knew that he was just kind of around working on stuff. And I said, hey, this is the deal with this.
Right.
Don't just listen to it. Just burn through a couple of takes if you're willing to, and keep it kind of old school. And so he did his drum tracks in 2 evenings at his house, and I picked between the two takes, as I normally do with him, and then we had like a trio document, with me playing guitar, bass, and the one vocal, and him on drums. And I was like, okay, now I want to hear this mixed, because at this point now the analytical part is creeping in, and now I realize I'm actually making a record. Whereas the whole time before that, no conception of making a record whatsoever. I think once you get in that frame of mind of I'm making a record, you
Right.
start wanting to change things and you start wanting to perfect things and saying like, oh, maybe we should add this, maybe we should add that. And I had to kind of hold myself to this aesthetic that I had, created from the beginning. And I wanted to get it to a mix engineer as quickly as possible before I started adding stuff. Because I had a hunch that in the right hands, everything was kind of already there that was needed. It just needed to be punctuated with a real mix, but also with details that could, just squeeze a little bit more out of the performance.
Yeah.
And so I sent it to a friend of mine named Rich Mauser, who mixes a lot of things in the prog world as well. A lot of projects that Mike Portnoy's been involved in, Transatlantic, Liquid Tension Experiment, Neil Morse Band, that kind of stuff. But Rich is he's a guitar player as well, and he mixes all sorts of stuff. And I've worked with him in a live context many times, but just not on record. So I again gave him the pitch and I said, do what you're gonna do. And what he came back with, I thought he just nailed exactly what the idea was, which is just this very kind of vintage sounding trio, but without doing that thing that a lot of people do where they try to make a pastiche of it, where they try to make it sound like an old cassette tape or whatever. I didn't want him to do any of that. I just wanted it to be more period correct in terms of, he has a real Echoplex, he's got a Leslie, he's got a Cooper Time Cube, all of this really cool vintage gear that he could use. And so I'm really thrilled with the process. I was constantly surprised that these quick little demos that I've made in a week. And I don't say that to pat myself on the back, other than it was so counter to the way I usually make things, which is just like kind of walking around 360 degrees, constantly criticizing myself, thinking, is this good enough? Is this good enough?
Yeah.
It was a real kind of cathartic process of letting go. And I think within that, when I listen to it, like I always get kind of a jolt from it, because I hear myself playing things that in a way I haven't really allowed myself the freedom to do for whatever reason that is, because I've gone down these other roads, and it's almost like this music it's not that it's not valid, but it's like so far away from something like Porcupine Tree or some of these other more progressive ventures that I've been a part of. But I think it's a great time to unexpectedly get to present this side of me, because it's authentic. It's not a put on. It's not, oh, let's just make this kind of record. It happened very organically. So I'm really happy with it.
Something that might inspire folks that are listening to this that are wanting to get more involved in writing originals. You and Marco strike me as guys that are incredibly prolific, and part of that might be, besides the talent part of it, you're not afraid to take the smallest germ of an idea and just see it to fruition. I think a lot of folks that want to do their own stuff overanalyze things. They might be coming up with these cool ideas, but because they're not documenting them or not giving them enough credence, they just dismiss that, and they never get to the point of seeing something through to the point of, wow, I've got a cool song here. Maybe I can bring my buddy in to play drums on this, or just, and then that track turns into 2 tracks and maybe 3. So whether it's an EP or a full length thing, it's just to get to the place where you guys are, where it seems like at any given time, the two of you could knock out a fully formed record like that, and it would be amazing. But
Right.
it's because of the fact of the time that you've spent, in addition to playing your instrument, to just know how to chase chase things down to their logical conclusion. So any way that you can illuminate that germ of an idea as far as how to push through things, and maybe there's something in each of us that is valid.
Yeah.
We tend to have, sometimes we have this, and I'll speak for myself, this imposter syndrome where you're just recreating something and you dismiss it, but in reality, there might be something there.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and trust me, I'm no stranger to imposter syndrome. I think just about everybody has it to one degree or
Right.
another, and I know the things that certainly put me in that place. But yeah, I mean, Marco in particular, I've learned so much from him. Not only just because he's a brilliant musician and just, just such a rare breed, um, but his ability to stick with an idea. He's very much that just laser focused kind of thing. If he starts something, he's going to finish it, even if he doesn't end up using it. He's not one to really leave what he calls construction zones. Um, he's not one to leave too many of those around. He'll start something, he'll see it through. If it takes a day because he's super quick, so be it. If it takes him a week, he's gonna finish it, and then he's gonna move on. I really admire that, and I try to be more like that. The truth is that I can be hot and cold when it comes to that. My phone, like a lot of people, I'm sure, is full of voice memos that in the moment feel like they're going to be great songs, and then they sit in purgatory, potentially for years, waiting to be decided upon. And it's a tough thing. I think the biggest thing is maybe to just kind of push through and to set yourself up for the kind of workflow that makes it easy to jump into an idea. Obviously with digital recording and mobility of just needing a laptop and a little recording interface, the idea of even doing demos in some way is almost antiquated, in the sense that from the start of an idea, you could really be building the final. I mean, that's what this unintentional thing is. One day they were demos, and then one day it was decided, no, they're not demos. These are worthy as they are. They just need some help and some time to get them over the finish line. But to make it easy to sort of take an idea from point A to B, on the technical end, so you don't get bogged down, hours looking for the sound, and then before you know it, you've exhausted
Yeah.
your brain power and your energy, so you decide to just move on, and then you don't do anything with the idea. I try to be inspired by people who are like career songwriters who just get up like clockwork
Yeah.
every day, like it's just an average 9 to 5, and just write a song, because it is a numbers game. I mean, it's art, of course it's art, but uh, the idea of completing something, even if you write 10 songs in a row that you think are crap, there's always something about that process that kind of opens up more possibilities. You're constantly learning, and almost you're allowing more in, so that you might grab one of those ideas and see it through. And I think for me, with this record in particular, that's exactly what could have happened. If I had not set the conditions and the parameters of, this is how much time I have, I'm going to treat this loosely. I mean, I want it to be good, but in the end, the whole point was to just write music to play at a gig. Nobody was going to know if we made a mistake. Nobody's heard the songs before, so it was kind of a low pressure situation. But stylistically, I wanted it to be in the ballpark of what I was aiming for, with the festival itself. But the kind of riffs I was coming up with in another context might have been the kind of thing where I would have kept playing for the next hour, and that would have just gone just flown out of the window like anything else. But it was this idea of like, okay, yeah, I like that. That's cool. Let's immediately add, you know, a drum part and a bass line to it. And suddenly just the act of doing that, just taking an intro and laying down the guitar part, then grabbing the bass, coming up with the part, and then putting the drums in. Now it sounds like a facsimile of a band, and you start to get a vibe going, and then you want to actually see where it ends up. Like, oh, what's coming next? So you get more excited by the process, except instead of it feeling like work or drudgery or something. Oh, I can't come up with something. It's just don't think about it. Just have it be a natural flowing thing. And a lot of times you listen to people talk about that kind of stuff, and if you've never experienced it, you think that it's either BS, or you can't imagine how that could be possible.
Right.
But if you do feel it though, you start to recognize that there are other ways of creating, and a lot of it is about kind of getting out of your own way.
Yes.
um, which is not to say that you shouldn't be analytical and you know really look at what you're doing, and listening for how to make it better, and uh, you know to make your vision the truest version of what you think it should be in that moment. I mean, you can always go back to something you did, even a year ago, but if not many years ago, and say, oh, if I could do this all over again,
Yeah.
it would be like this. That's fine. That's always going to happen. I've always just tried in the moment to not feel as though I've compromised uh, anything, and that if I'm willing to put it out in the world, I stand behind it for what it is.
Right.
So, so yeah, but I mean, at the basic level, I think it's really just about getting over these different confidence blocks to just take the seed of an idea, see it through, and know that there will be more if you don't like that one. But you have to know what it feels like to even make something that you don't like before you can make something that you do. I think you can't expect to come out of the gate fully formed. I mean, it's just so rarely, if ever, happens.
Yeah. The beautiful thing about what you're describing is that years from now, when you're into the next project, whatever that may be, you're looking back on this period of time when you released the unintentional record, and you're thinking about what led that what got you into that particular phase, the Les Paul guitar, and it's a wonderful snapshot of a moment in time, and to have those to look back on as your body of work, it's fun to go back and look at that family album kind of thing of like, yeah, that's where I was back in 2023 going into 24. And it's very cool to have that as kind of a living testimonial to where you were at that moment in time.
Definitely, definitely, yeah. It's funny. I used to be in some ways more uh more loose about just putting things out and not being so precious. If it was experimental, yeah, just put it out there. Maybe somebody will like it. But I think when you start to gain either more attention or success, however you want to look at it,
Yeah.
a part of you risks not being as open because you start to feel like there's more pressure to always deliver something.
Yeah.
Again, you always want it to be good, but it's like if you're constantly comparing yourself to your past work, uh, it can be unhealthy, or keep you from being as open as you might otherwise be. Whereas I think in this day and age, and maybe maybe a benefit of some of the shorter attention spans is that you can take some chances, and it's not the end of the world if you put something out and it's a little weird or it's an outlier in your catalog, because if you're the kind of person who's productive enough, and it's not going to just tank your career, I think you can absorb that potential blowback, to say like, okay, well, I tried this thing and people weren't digging it, whatever. I'll move on to the next sort of thing. I think I've always sort of held up, people, sort of prolific and iconoclastic artists, people like Zappa, or yeah, at a different end of the spectrum, somebody like Neil Young, like these guys who they just seemed to live to create and be in the moment, and uh and you never know what you're going to get
Yeah.
with those artists.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously with Frank, you could have gotten an orchestral record, and then 3 months later it's like kind of jam big band stuff, and then a concept out, it's just,
Doo-wop, it was
yeah, exactly.
it's Disco Boy, or
Yeah,
then you get Zoodalures, and it's like, yeah, but it was all his his idea of conceptual continuity, that everything was, there was a through line to everything. You may not know what that is, and maybe only Frank knew what that was, but
yeah,
everything. And he also had a thing of anything at any time for no reason at all, or
yeah,
something.
yeah, yep, exactly.
Yeah, but
Yeah, so I tend to think of my body of work kind of along those lines. It's not so much, um I mean, I'm sure people who really know my stuff would say that I have a style or something, but at the same time, sometimes I think like, well, I don't know what my style is. It's kind of like, I think I've realized that I'm in love with the process of
yeah,
making music, and whatever seems to be appealing to me in the moment, to kind of see that idea through, and work with whatever colors seem appealing to me in the moment, uh that is almost more important in the long run than having a quote unquote sound. I think through it all, a sound is there and will emerge, but I know when I've talked to fans of mine, the difficulty in trying to describe my music to other people, and like where to start, is always, uh yeah, it's always an issue, because it's like, well, what adventure do you want to go on? Do you want to take the sort of singer songwriter trip? Do you want to do kind of more of an ambient thing? Do you want to do the full on, you know Prague experience? Or with this, where does this trio, hard blues driven rock thing fit in with everything else that I've done? On the surface, it maybe doesn't really fit in at all, except it does. So, I'm much more into the idea of like this overarching, um, thing of just kind of like treating each thing in its own sort of art project.
yeah,
My grandfather, my mom's dad, he was an artist. He was a painter, and that's eventually how he made his living, selling paintings at art shows and stuff. And he did a lot of different things, but there were a couple of things that he did really well that became like his sort of trademark, and he would get commissioned to do things of similar nature for people. So if he was painting a sailboat in this beautiful scene, somebody would say like, oh, can you do a sailboat with my son's name on it or something,
right.
or a barn or a city skyline. And I remember my grandmother, when he passed a few years ago, I was just asking her about, you know, how he would go into his studio every day and just, paint and paint and paint. And she would say, yeah, keep painting the boats, honey, And it's like, yeah, and in one way, that's exactly what it is. Songs are like that, just keep writing them. I mean, something's gonna happen or not. In his case, he had a successful thing going, so it was easy enough to just keep doing the same thing, and paying the bills. And we all know those artists and bands out there who did hit on a sound and decided to stick with just that thing. And I used to think of that as a kind of laziness, um, for my taste, but as I've gotten older, I see how hard that would be for me to do, which is to just like pick that one thing and stay with it. So I actually really admire the people who have been able to do that, and sort of guarantee you that that flavor you love isn't really going to change all that much.
Yeah.
Um, I see the validity in that in a way that I didn't used to. I used to just think like, oh, but it's the same thing. Give me something new, and then you realize, okay, well, not everybody wants that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you go to that restaurant because they make that dish that you love, and they make it the best you've ever had it. So
Yeah. Yeah. In the end, it's wherever you end up on the spectrum is okay. I always find that it's exciting for somebody like yourself that has a lot of different books and a lot of different sections of the bookstore. You know,
mhm.
one in the fiction, one nonfiction, one in the sport. It's cool to be in places where you wouldn't normally expect somebody to be, and maybe it's not exact. Like if your next fate you stumbled upon a Telecaster with a G and a B bender, and it not to say that you're going to go all Buck Owens kind of stuff or Brad Paisley thing, but if it led you into a certain territory that gave you a new chapter in your career, that's pretty cool. Or a lap steel guitar, maybe
Yeah,
a Weisenborn acoustic laps, whatever it might be. It's exciting when either an artist or a piece of gear can lead you into something new and provocative.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, to that point, like I've become a little bit of a keyboard nerd as well. Like, alongside all of the guitar heroes and stuff. I mean, Keith Emerson was
Yeah.
one of my first musical heroes as well, and I loved the idea that you could be in a power. Speaking of power trios, be in a trio where the keyboard player is the lead instrument. Is amazing. Um, Now I'm about a hundredth of the ability. I didn't grow up taking piano lessons, self-taught on other instruments, but my my interests in it have led me to, build up a little keyboard collection, and more than ever, I find myself wanting to be better as a pianist, and somebody who, understands how synthesizers work and that kind of stuff. And certainly touring with Porcupine Tree, Richard Barbieri was on stage the closest to me. He was up on a riser, just to my left, and he's such a unique voice, as a keyboard player, because he comes from that world of texture and soundscapes, the kind of Brian Eno school, if you will, and just watching him create these sounds, and his ability, with his keyboard rig and stuff. I was like, man, I really want something like that. It was just so inspiring, and so different than what most bands, have, in terms of this sort of keyboard role, whether it's the classic, Hammond Deep Purple kind of keyboard player, or an Emerson, or what have you. He broke open this whole textural world that I was already interested in, but to get to watch, to me,
Right.
one of the masters up close,
Yeah.
really inspiring. So, I mean, there's a part of me that would love to make a like a keyboard record, and I wouldn't call myself a keyboard player, but except I have such a respect and love for many records like that,
Yeah.
and I think I could, make something interesting in that territory, just because it's still going to be me. It's just not me on my chosen
Right.
instrument, but it's still your musicality and your taste and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. You've got a close working relationship with Adam Holtzman and Richard and
Yeah,
Steven Wilson.
yeah,
Those guys, obviously. I mean, Steven's new album, Harmony Codex, I believe is what
yes,
it's called.
yeah,
I think the original genesis of that was some old old synth, some modular synths or things like
Yeah,
that. It makes perfect sense that if you're kind of with those guys and you already have a proclivity towards keyboards, that would make, and I think your fans would love that.
yeah, and I one of the things too that with unintentional, I mean it's a short record. You know, 6 songs, 29 minutes, which by old standards, if you think about like some of the Van Halen records were only
Right.
30 minutes, it's not like people weren't putting out short albums. But I think now there is actually somewhat of a freedom in shorter releases. There are a lot of artists who just drop little EPs, out of nowhere and that kind of stuff. So I could see, you know, kind of exploring certain genres or certain ideas about, musical configurations for like these kind of short, condensed bursts of creativity, whether it's, just for a couple of weeks, just to see what that yields, and if there's enough material worthwhile, 15, 20 minutes up to a half hour, whatever it happens to be. Again, with that ethos of just finishing it, and if you think it's good, put it out and move on. It's not to constantly confuse people on purpose. It's just to kind of like follow whatever the muse
Yeah.
happens to be. And but I also think that within all of this is the possibility that, say something like unintentional finds an audience. It's you know it would be cold to say that it's like market research or something, but it gives you at least a sense of, oh, if people are liking this, and I really like doing this too, why not continue to kind of go down that road every once in a while, and before you know it, you might have a whole show's worth of that kind of thing, that you can go out and play and tour and stuff like that. Because I'm also into the idea of in being a solo artist, I think it gives you some leeway that a band identity doesn't
Yeah.
have. I mean, again, talking about a band like Rush, obviously you've got, once you get past the first album, the band we know as Rush then exists for 40 years, and you don't you think of those three guys. Somewhere along the way, if one of them had dropped out, we'll never know what would have happened, but as the history is, um you identify with those people in that band. And I think it gets difficult when bands lose to when there's too much turnover in the members. Some of these classic like kind of southern rock bands and stuff in the 70s who are still going in some iteration, go to their Wikipedia pages, they've had like 40 guitar players.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow, who's that guy? It'll say like this guy was here from March 81 to April 81, and then some other guy came in. And then it just kind of, dilutes the thing. So I like the idea of like kind of small, um, like mobile possibilities. I've got a solo thing. I've just done this duo set with Adam Holtzman that could develop. I love the functionality of a trio. Aside from just aesthetically loving a trio, it is in reality, as far as rock bands go, it is the most mobile thing you could do, unless you're, the Black Keys or something, and can pull it off as a duo. Everybody has to lean on each other in a trio. And if you want to get into the logistical specifics, you got to start thinking about how many seats you have in the van, how much gear you have, how many hotel rooms you can afford to book, all
Yeah.
that, the business side of music business that all of us have wanted to always avoid, but is, the reality ever more so. It's just harder and harder to, put these things together. And even veteran bands, really feeling the
Yeah.
crunch when it comes to just trying to scrape together a budget to do stuff. So, um, So yeah, so it has, beyond just the music itself, it also has other implications about how to actually go perform and to do it in a smart and effective way. You
Right.
know, because back in the day, I mean, those guys just had to, they just had to grind.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
and you know, I like the grind, but there are smarter ways to do it now. I mean, one gig can have the impact of potentially hundreds if you've filmed it and recorded it and you've found a way to present it properly.
Yeah, that's the thing in this day and age is that the small thing that you might do in tandem with one of the songs off of Unintentional could be just the flag that you need for people to be able to zero in and check out the rest of it. It's an exciting time with what you can do with an iPhone. You know,
Yeah,
create Adobe Express or something like that. Create something really cool, put it out there in conjunction with your new tune. All of a sudden, it kind of gets picked up. It's kind of like, when you're, if you're stuck on a desert island, you're trying to get into the shipping lanes where a big ship can see you and get you back to land. It's kind of like sometimes all you need is that little flag to say, hey, check this out.
yeah, yeah. And you
That's what,
catch somebody at the right time in the right place, and suddenly, you find yourself in a situation that you couldn't have imagined, or you could have only imagined, which has happened to me many times in my life, and I'm very grateful for that.
the exciting thing to me, it seems, for all the things that you're doing to write and record and uh, advance your catalog of material, you're also working with very interesting musicians that are you're able to get inspiration from, and they slightly turn your trajectory to something that you may not have thought of. So whether it's Stephen or Marco or Adam or Richard or the Neil Morse from uh, Transatlantic, whomever you come across in that world, um, all of the people that you've worked with really are kind of in the same have the same mindset, and they seem very open to a lot of different things
Yeah,
and
yeah,
are really trying to be prolific and exciting and create cool stuff. So it can't help but it's that proximity effect. you know
sure, yeah,
Surrounding yourself with those type of people can only make you better. And it's also the human part of the interaction of getting to know these folks on a human level besides the musical thing,
of
how
course.
they influence you as a person through their sense of humor or literature, or just if their fascination with wine or architecture or whatever.
Yeah,
Those are the things when you're on the road, those are the you rarely talk about uh, musical things unless it's something that went terribly wrong that you can laugh about. Typically, what like your shirt, the Philip K. Dick
oh
thing,
yeah, yeah,
turning somebody onto a new author or, whatever, an obscure movie, maybe a Fellini movie that you've never seen.
sure.
On the road, that's really where that's the great musical currency of what we do is the interaction with fellow musicians.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, being on the road with Stephen Wilson, I mean, that was, just for that reason alone, put aside, the great music that we're making and all the humor and everything, um, completely in heaven from the perspective of a fellow music enthusiast, to
Yeah.
have like basically an encyclopedia in your band, that you can just ask stuff and also go back and forth with sort of mutual interests and stuff. There was there was this one festival we played this summer. We were on a bill, and Wishbone Ash was playing earlier in the
Oh
day.
wow, Andy Powell and the guys.
Yeah, yeah. And we were just sitting back there and catering, and from memory, the two of us were going back and forth trying to list, up to a certain point. They have so many records, but like in chronological order, the names of every Wishbone Ash record. And it
Yeah.
was, just kind of like this back and forth, and it was really fun, but it was also like, for me, that's the kind of really deep like liner notes kind of scouring that I grew up with. You know, my dad was that kind of guy, and I've had certain people in and out of my life throughout that contained that interest and that retention of certain knowledge of records and the really deep stuff of the studios that they were recorded at and who produced and who engineered and all that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, when you're around people like that, it's very inspiring, and I ask a lot of questions, probably too many, but I'm very curious, and when you have the ability to directly talk to people like that, um, you know, it's really worth having those conversations because there might be that one thing that gets recommended or said that just completely, you know, blows your mind and changes, again, like you said, changes the course of what you were on, or deepens the one that you're already on.
Yeah, and especially the some of the English guy, you know, besides Steven, like Jonas Reingold, and well, he's
Hmm.
Swedish, but
Yeah, yeah.
guys in Steve Hackett's band,
Uh-huh.
those they seem like they would be all very diverse interests in things from literature to classical music to thing. I mean, it would just be an education, just the hang at catering.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which that's. I mean, I think that's the coolest stuff. I mean, whether you're talking about the Argus album by Wishbone Ash or talking about, you know, what book was that what was the book that came out after Cat's Cradle, you know, or whatever
Right, sure.
whatever you just are talking about. It's just
Yeah.
that's really the thing that I think we all as musicians love, and it's a real honor to do these to be able to do these interviews. I learned so much from guys like yourself or whomever I've interviewed. It's but the thing that I'm always struck by is the greater the musician, the more kind and humane
Hmm.
folks that I've been interviewing. And so it's a real great thing to get to see behind the curtain of what they're up to in terms of creating music or their philosophies on writing or touring or recording in the studio, their feelings about gear or promotion or social media. It's a
Yeah.
it even before I played guitar, the guy who I admired the most was David Letterman. I was like, man, I would love to just be able to talk to people all the time. If I
Yeah.
could talk to musicians for the rest of my life, that would be, and I never got to play music, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I hear you.
There's so much to learn. It's endlessly fascinating.
Well, yeah, and to that point, I mean, you know, the fact that we're in this podcast era,
Yeah,
uh, you know, I, what a gift it's been, you know, to me personally. I mean, just to be able to listen to yourself talk to other players that I love, and just across the spectrum of interests, you know, to really get a deeper sense of who people are, where they're coming from, beyond what used to just be a 5 or 10 minute, you know, kind of very quick interview. Now people are, sometimes for better or worse, but mostly for better, able to really expand over hours sometimes on
yeah.
different subjects. And
And
yeah,
we
incredible.
never once talked about string gauges or picks
Yeah, I know.
or tube screamers versus like the new Noble, the Keeley Noble tube screamer versus the old what I
Yeah,
love beer, but only in as much as um, it serves whatever thing I'm doing, and I love talking about it, but it seems like there's a threshold with which you can only talk about gear so much before it becomes.
yeah, I hear you.
I mean, if I had a question for you about something like really specific, like on that recording of, well, actually, here is a question I have. What's the significance of the mink?
The make
Oh,
that's some sort of inside joke that started on this last Porcupine Tree tour. It actually has to do with something I said a few minutes ago, when I was referencing these sort of southern rock bands.
oh yeah,
I'm not gonna name any out loud, because I don't want to, you know, make anybody upset. But it became this sort of in joke between Steven and I about certain groups. But what we noticed when we would look at these Wikipedia pages that had just this endless list of musicians who had been in and out of these bands is that a lot of them had these nicknames, um, like in between their first and last name, and some of them were just completely ridiculous. So at a certain point, it was necessary for us to come up with our own sort of Southern rock nicknames. Um, so somehow I landed on the Mink, and that became a thing to the point where at the end of the tour, like when they would put out the placards for the different dressing rooms, it's the Mink, Mcstine, and all that kind of stuff. He had a couple of different ones that we were trying out. But yeah, it's kind of it's so there are 3 songs on the record that have the 3 instrumentals actually. You thought it would just kind of be silly to thematically tie them together only by title, so the first one, The Mink is Born, opens up the record, and then The Mink in the City, which in its own way, that track is kind of very much a tribute to when I started going to New York City specifically. In my early teens, my dad would drive me down so Binghamton, New York is about 3 hours in change from Manhattan. And just to try to get some exposure and stage time down there, early 2000s, pre-YouTube, all that kind of stuff, pre-social media, MySpace was around. We would go to places like the Bitter End, in fact.
Yeah.
They would have like a Sunday night jam, just to sign up on the sheet and try to get up there on stage and meet people. And so that kind of funky bluesy thing, it almost has a little bit of a Robin Ford vibe to it or something. That's a lot of the kind of stuff I would hear when I would go to these clubs and try to sit in and jam. So that's the Mink in the City, and then the third one is the Mink Goes Home, which is more of this kind of like quasi Zeppelin meets Zappa. I played a 12-string, electric 12-string on that one. So anyways, long story short, the Mink it's sort of a Southern rock alter ego that I joke back and forth with Steven Wilson, and we just have this super long thread on WhatsApp. So, but and again, one of the beauties of touring, right? Like if you develop really nice relationships with people, those kind of in jokes and things that you kind of carry with you. And Rush, of course, just again, they have a whole lexicon of these things between now 2 of them, sadly, but the 3 of them that developed over just so much time on the road and so many experiences.
Lurks, Dirk, Bubba, and then back in the day, the bag, where Alex,
right.
the bag
Yeah.
of, but yeah, I think that's the thing is that when musicians, especially when you run into somebody that you haven't seen for a while, and you remember a tour or time that some gigs that you did together, typically it will always go back to something really stupid and sophomoric or silly, whatever, not stupid necessarily, or just a gig that something went terribly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Something just way out of the ordinary. It's very rare that you sit around and pat yourselves on the back. Remember how great that standing ovation was? It's never that kind of stuff at all. It's always, something banal.
Yeah, but those things tie you to again, like kind of like what you were saying at the very beginning, with music, it ties you to a time and place of hopefully really good memories, and then you start to remember the things around that, around that joke or around that gig, and then that can be a doorway into thinking about what it was like to play certain countries or venues and stuff.
Yeah. Well, the time has just flown by.
I hope I didn't. I can spin a yarn sometimes. So
Oh man, it's you touched on so many cool different things, but you explained them in a way that I think people really love it. I mean, it
Oh,
was.
good, man. Thank you.
I
Yeah,
know that.
go
Uh,
ahead.
that's all I got.
Oh, I was just gonna say I listened to because when you reached out to me, I was asking you, about some of the different ones that you've done, and I listened to the chat you had with Frank Marino.
Yeah,
Wow, it was really deep. Like I hadn't really heard many interviews with him, to be honest. And another sort of guitarist for sure in that pantheon of people I was mentioning earlier. That I definitely grew up with the Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush live album, which is just a classic. I think that influenced a lot of people, as you mentioned. Zach Wild
yeah,
and so on. But some of those heavier records that came after, like Juggernaut, Power, Rock and Roll, What's Next, that whole era of his stuff, and yeah, he blew me away, from a pretty early age. So it was cool to get, some to hear some of his, like, his philosophies just on really deep tonality stuff, but also his experience in the business, and just all these things that I didn't know
yeah,
about, because he's always been, yeah, he's definitely not somebody who has continued to be that, constantly touring marquee kind of player that everybody should know who he is, but for reasons he explained, things didn't quite go in
yeah.
that direction. But it was really nice to hear him speak about this stuff. So
I always,
testament to yourself as an interviewer to give him the space, and to kind of feed him questions and ideas, so that he could just kind of take it and run with it. It was great.
yeah, he really has a passion for what he does. I think uh, he hasn't had the greatest experience in the business itself. I think he said something along the lines of "I just don't suffer fools." He has a hard time playing some of the, especially back in the day, the games that you have to play, or the things the machinations that go on behind the scenes that you have to do to kind of get ahead. That wasn't his thing at all. And he's a very reticent about the whole social media thing, and so it was. I think his exit from touring was, um, timely, because I think he had done everything that he wanted to do, and but man,
Yeah.
he's such a fine singer, such a fine player, and guys like Zach Wild, yourself, myself, Paul Gilbert, so many players just adored Frank, and for good reason.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I'm
Um,
excited to hear some more of the, go through the archive, because that one
yeah,
was great.
yeah, I did the first two seasons were just audio, and then this third season has just been an absolute blessing. Everything will be coming out on video.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
but I've got, in a span of just a month, I've recorded more episodes than I did the entire time that I've done it before. So I think, by the first week of December, I'll have 24 finished, and then I'm going to go through the process of editing and everything. But it's for the teenage kid that lives inside me, it's like an absolute thrill to meet and talk to your musical heroes, and to have them be such fine human beings, and very uh, welcoming, and just generous with their time and energies and stuff. So it's been an incredibly positive, probably the most satisfying thing I've done, uh, without actually playing. I mean, that has to do with music. It's really just been a treat.
No, that's great. I'm really happy that you've
Yeah.
put this together, and that you're having a blast. And honored to be among
Yeah.
your list of
Oh, absolutely.
my influence as well. So thank you.
Um, Tom had told me about you back in the day, and he said, "Oh my God, this guy is in the band is just incredible." He said, he's he's all the things about a guitar player that I would love to be.
That's very sweet of him to say. Yeah.
Very kind, very sung your praises. So, Randy, none of this absolute pleasure. Next time I talk to Tom, I'll have to let him know that you and I chatted. And
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
so
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Have a great weekend.
Okay, you too, and I'll send you the address.
Perfect. Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you for tuning in to the Guitar Hang Podcast, interviews with noteworthy guitar players from around the world. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications to stay updated on our latest episodes.